For a brief and brilliant period in the late 1980s and early 90s, Sega dared to imagine something more than your traditional stand-up arcade cabinet. They didn't just want you to play a game, they wanted you to live inside of it. They looked at the arcade floor and saw not just a game room, but an amusement park of imagination. They saw the potential for spectacle, and so they built them. Cockpits that pitched and rolled, motorcycles you could physically lean into, race cars that shuddered with the roar of a V8. These weren't just games, they were destinations. But to understand why these machines were so revolutionary, you have to understand the philosophy that built them. And in this video, I'm going to show you how Sega's unique strategy of immersion completely dominated the arcade scene. And we'll start by looking at the core idea that made every one of these machines an unforgettable event. The philosophy was one of physical presence. The logic was elegant in its ambition. To create a memory that lasted, you had to engage the body. This was a full-scale assault on the senses. But to see this philosophy in its most breathtaking form, we need to climb into the machine that perhaps best encapsulates Sega's audacity. A machine that didn't just simulate flight, it became the ride itself. We're talking about the deluxe sit-down version of Afterburner II. Yeah, the one made famous in the arcade scene in the movie Terminator 2. Standing before it, you weren't just looking at a screen. You were looking at a machine that weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. This wasn't a simple plastic shell. The deluxe cabinet was a substantial, engineering-heavy unit, designated internally by Sega as the TX-1000. It placed you in a mock-up pilot seat surrounded by control panels, within a fully enclosed gondola. Your hands gripped a realistic flight stick and throttle, connected to a complex control unit filled with variable resistors and gears that required precise factory alignment. The immersion began before you even inserted a coin. But the true magic was in the base. The entire gondola was mounted on a sophisticated electromechanical system inside the massive base. This system utilized two separate motor units, one for pitching and one for rolling, each driven by 80-volt DC motors with worm gear speed reducers. When you pulled back on the stick to climb, the pitching motor unit engaged, tilting the entire cockpit structure backwards up to a precise limit, synchronized with the action on screen. Banking into a hard turn engaged the rolling motor, leading the gondola smoothly into the curve. See, this wasn't a wild, acrobatic motion. It was a highly calibrated and responsive experience. And this game sold the combination of blistering superscalar visuals and the precise physical feedback, convincing your body you were pulling G-forces. The roar of the engine and the clatter of the hydraulics were pumped through 15-watt speakers directly into the cockpit, completing the assault on your senses. Afterburner II's deluxe cabinet was a masterclass in creating a complete power fantasy. It proved that a video game could be a serious experience. But what if a tilting cockpit wasn't enough? What if Sega's engineers looked at these motor units and thought, this is a good start, but it's not nearly enough freedom? What if the goal wasn't to just tilt you, but to give you total, unrestricted motion in any direction? The answer to that question wasn't just a new cabinet. It was a technological monstrosity that redefined the limit of what an arcade machine could be. The answer, of course, was the Sega R360 and its flagship game, G-LOC Air Battle. If Afterburner's motorized base was impressive, the R360 was utterly terrifying in its ambition. And its name said it all. Rotate 360. This wasn't a cockpit on a tilting frame. It was a fully enclosed pod, 7 feet in diameter, weighing over a ton, suspended inside a massive metal gyroscopic cage. This cage allowed it to rotate a full 360 degrees, not on one, but on 2 separate axes. Imagine it. The pod could pitch forward and back, yaw left and right, and most astonishingly, roll completely upside down and just keep on spinning. It was, for all intents and purposes, a professional-grade flight simulator gimbal they put in the arcade. Climbing inside was an event. You were secured by a 4-point racing harness and a safety bar. Operators were warned never to leave it unattended, for fear of a player losing a limb. Light sensors would stop the machine if you stuck an arm out, and there were 2 emergency stop buttons. Sega's own warning barred players who were pregnant, had heart conditions, high blood pressure, or mental or psychological issues. Okay. Playing G-LOC in this beast was the purest expression of the term G-force-induced loss of consciousness that's in the title. As you dogfought on the 20-inch monitor inside the pod, the machine would match your every move with violent, precise rotations. A sharp turn didn't just tilt you, it rolled you onto your side. The loop-de-loop would send you completely inverted. It was the ultimate fusion of Sega's ride philosophy and Yu Suzuki's design ethos. A $90,000 monument to over-engineering that only the largest arcades could afford. It was so intense, so immersive, that contemporary reviews literally called it the greatest sensory overload you could get with your clothes on. The R360 was the final boss of Sega's motion cabinet lineage. But for every machine designed to make you scream with vertigo, Sega also built ones that made you sweat with tension, ones that traded the freedom of the sky for the visceral, shuddering reality of combat much closer to the ground. While Afterburner II and the R360 sold the fantasy of high-altitude jet combat, Thunderblade delivered the gritty, low-altitude chaos of helicopter warfare. Its sit-down cabinet took a different and somewhat low-key approach. You climbed into what looks like a skeleton mock-up of an attack helicopter cockpit, your hands on the control stick that mimicked the real thing. The authenticity immediately grounded you, but Sega knew static realism wasn't enough, so they added motion. The seat and control stick combination was mounted atop a rotating motion base that would swivel horizontally around the X-axis as you steered the controls. This was a different kind of physical feedback. It wasn't electrically powered motion, but a gliding and smooth sense of movement that immediately sold the illusion of your gunship's power. The sound of the engines, the chopper blades, and the weapons fire blasted your eardrum from the speakers that are built into the headrest of the seat. This enveloped you in a 3D audio experience that made it all feel just so real. And this, my friends, is the one you really have to play to understand how well all the pieces come together in a way that creates an utterly real sense of simulation. Now, if Thunderblade brought the battlefield down to Earth, Sega's ambition soon aimed for the stars. The logical and perhaps ultimate progression of their motion cabinet philosophy arrived with Galaxy Force II. This machine represented a staggering leap in the scale and technological spectacle. It wasn't merely a cockpit, it was a full-sized, self-contained theater of motion, and the true marvel was underneath. The entire contraption, including the seat, controls, and screen, was mounted on a revolutionary hydraulic motion platform with multiple degrees of freedom. This wasn't just tilting or shaking. The Galaxy Force II cabinet could precisely simulate the complex physics and movement of 3D spaceflight. The sweeping, banking turns of a starfighter, the sudden lurch of a dive into a canyon on an alien world, the jarring impact of a crash landing. The synchronization between the breathtaking superscalar sprites graphics racing across the huge screen and the corresponding fluid motion of the pedestal created the feeling of seamless movement. You weren't watching a space battle, you were piloting through one, with your body feeling every roll, yaw, and pitch. Galaxy Force II was another example of Sega's game ride philosophy, a glorious monument to technical overkill that made every other game in the arcade somehow just seem weak and underpowered. It proved there was no fantasy too grand to physically simulate. Yet, for all of its interstellar ambition, Sega's engineers were also masters of elegant simplicity. They had another idea, one that stripped away the complex machinery and put the player's own body in direct, intuitive control of a simpler, but no less thrilling experience. Sega's pursuit of physicality reached a different kind of extreme with Super Hang-On. Here, the concept of a complex cabinet was entirely abandoned. In its place stood a full-scale replica of a high-performance racing motorcycle. You mounted it, straddling the seat. The genius was in its beautifully simple control scheme. To turn, you physically leaned the entire bike to the left or the right. This created a profound mind-body connection. To take a sharp corner, you committed your whole body weight, just like a real rider. The game responded with a satisfying on-screen lean. The direct mapping was revolutionary. You weren't operating a motorcycle. For that brief moment, you were the rider. It sold the fantasy of speed with a visceral, athletic sensation as you leaned into the curve. Super Hang-On was a pure kinetic thrill. It demonstrated that immersion could be achieved through the most basic of designs. But Sega had one more evolution in mind. What if you took that physical immersion and multiplied it? What if the experience wasn't solitary, but shared? The result would become the defining social spectacle of the 90s arcade. By the early 90s, Sega's philosophy evolved from creating singular rides to crafting social, competitive arenas. What started with arcade classics like Outrun, and then took the first step into the 3D world with virtual racing, was then blown away by the apex of this evolution, Daytona USA.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
This incredible NASCAR-inspired racer brought the white-knuckle sense of speed into the third dimension, with its impressive, fully texture-mapped graphics and sense of raw horsepower that was unleashed on Sega's new Model 2 hardware. And the definitive experience playing it was the deluxe sit-down model. I mean, this was a proper cabin. You sank into a bucket seat, surrounded by a full dashboard, a force feedback steering wheel that fought you in the turns. And as the race began, the cabinet began to rumble and move, delivering a symphony of tactile feedback. But Daytona's true masterstroke was linkage. Up to 8 of these massive cabinets could be networked together for head-to-head racing, and this transformed the experience from a solitary time trial into a friendly but sometimes heated social event. The arcade floor became a virtual speedway. The movement of the linked cabins made the competition tangible. You could even feel the vibration of drafting as you pulled alongside a rival. Daytona USA was the culmination of everything Sega had learned. It combined immersive physical feedback with cutting-edge 3D graphics and the electric atmosphere of multiplayer competition. It wasn't just a game you played, it was a new world where you were transported to with your friends. Now, today, we carry photorealistic worlds in our pockets. We have force feedback wheels and flight sticks for our homes, VR headsets that can transport us anywhere. But there's something about the sheer, unapologetic scale of those Sega behemoths that remains unmatched. They were monuments of a specific time and place, the time when the arcade was king, and where to draw a crowd, you had to build a spectacle. These machines were too big, too expensive, and too complex for the living room. Now, unfortunately, as arcades faded, so too did these magnificent machines. But for those of us who were there, who felt our stomachs drop in a barrel roll, who were strapped into a spinning gyroscope, or leaned a full-size bike into a pixelated turn, the memory is as physical as it is visual. These weren't just playing a game, they were taking a ride, and for a handful of quarters, Sega made that fantasy gloriously and unforgettably real. But that's just what I think. What's your take on these Sega masterpieces? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your views. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. I'd like to invite you to subscribe for more feel-good retro gaming content. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.